Hey everyone, my name is Mark, and today we're going to work through how to make something like what you see on your screen. Now, this animation comes from Duolingo, and if you've ever used that app, you know that they have some really cool designs and animations. And I'm going to show you how to make this from a developer's point of view who does not have a design background. Let's look at the animation. So as you can see, there's a lot going on here, and this could totally seem intimidating, but the way we're going to break it down together, you'll be able to create this. So when I first started wanting to do Rive, one of the hardest things for me was figuring out how to get started. I didn't know what to do first. And as an engineer with no art background or no design background specifically, it was really intimidating. So let me explain to you what I did to figure things out. I looked at everything and told myself to break everything down. And when I say break it down, I really meant break it down into smaller basic shapes that I could use to compose. So if you're thinking about when you're programming, you can break things down into smaller objects, compose those objects, and then you have a more complex system. This is the same thing I did with this. So let's work together and let's identify some different parts. If you look at this object, what would that be? I see a circle. Then inside, I see something else. Here, guess what? I see another circle. Can you see how the pieces are starting to come together? Well, I think this piece, I think that's a square with maybe some rounded corners or something like that. Now, this is a tricky one. I kind of see a rectangle shape, but then I also see maybe some rounded corners. And then I would say both of these could be that same shape. This shadow right here, well, that looks like some type of maybe a rectangle again or a parallelogram. Okay, now when you look at it like that, it's actually a little bit different because we're not trying to process this entire thing all at the same time. Now, I know there's some other parts here that we haven't discussed how to do. Like, how would we do this part? Well, we'll figure that out when we do it. When I look at the crown, what I see is something that started off as a square, and then maybe I was able to move the edges out a little bit, maybe add some more edges. And before I know it, I have something that looks like a crown. Okay, that crown looks a little bit worse, but we can start to see the picture. And that's how you can create something like this. Now, let's actually jump into the tool and figure out how would we make this in real time. I'm in the Rive app at rive.app, and I'm going to break this down based on how I saw it and based on the drawing. First things first, if we look at the picture again, we see that circle that I described. So let's make that circle. If you click on that plus sign in the upper right hand corner, you're going to pull down the menu and go to the ellipse tool. You can also type O on your keyboard. When I go to the artboard is where my objects and shapes are going to live. I'm going to draw it and hold down the shift key so that way I can make sure that the proportions stay the same for the width and the height. This works with a lot of the shapes. Now I want to move it so that way I can position it properly. The first thing I'm going to do is go over to the upper right hand side of the menu, and in that side of the menu, as you can see, there are some options we can use. I'm going to use this option. I'm going to do align center, and then we're going to do another vertical alignment. Now from there, you can see I've aligned this circle. The next step, let's make it look closer to what we see here. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to change the fill, and the fill is the color of the shape. So let's set that to white, because if we look at our picture, that's what we see. We see white. And well, my first approach, I'm going to try to make this into the stroke, meaning the outline. But we might find that when we get closer to filling in this entire project, it might not be what we want. But we'll find out. You have to experiment the same way you would do with code. I have a stroke. The stroke means the outline. I'm going to change the thickness to about 29. So the way I'm doing this is I clicked into the field and then I'm dragging up on my mouse. Or I can go inside here and just type 29. So I type 29. Now that looks pretty good. Let's find out what that color is. Using your favorite tool, you can find out what the color is. And this is going to be an E5, E5, E5 in hex. So I'm going to go into the stroke, go down to where it says hex, and I'm going to paste in this E5, E5, E5. And that will give us the actual color that's being used in the Duolingo picture. Now, what comes next? Again, break this down. You want to think in terms of composition as much as you can and try to find areas where you could compose things together. So I'm going to draw another ellipse holding my shift key. And I'm going to approximate the size at first. Now I want to move it, so I need to go into the translate tool. I'm going to hit T on my keyboard to go into the translate tool. And I want to center it, and remember the tools that I showed you before: vertical center, horizontal center. Now, if we just eyeball this, now if you want to be very precise, of course you could measure it with some other tool and figure out what the distance between the stroke and the edge of the inner circle are, but I'm just gonna eyeball it because this is not about perfection. This is about getting comfortable with the tool and creating things that you want to see. I think this is really close. I may just go to, on the size, I may just go to 385 and 385 again. I think that's good enough. So now here's the great part. I don't really need the stroke yet, at least. So I can remove the stroke, which is removing the outline on the circle, and let's go inside the circle and let's choose the color for the circle. Now that color is going to be 1CB0F6 in hex. Now, if you don't have a tool that you can pull these colors up, one cool thing you can do is actually, if you open the image in your browser, you can use Chrome DevTools and do the eyedropper tool and pull out that color. Okay, now that looks just like what we're seeing here in terms of shapes and colors. So we're already getting some wins. Now, I like to do something where I like to organize things. Sometimes I will take shapes and organize them into what's called a node. And a node is kind of like a container group that you can apply different effects to the node, and all the children will get those same effects. Let me start by putting the node on the artboard. You see it here. I just clicked on it, and then I'm going to center the node. And then I'm going to move, if you go to my left side, I'm going to drag those two things inside of my node. So I take my ellipse shape, drag it inside, and then I take my other ellipse shape and drag both of these inside. What's the value that I get out of this? Well, one cool thing is that I can actually hide in view or lock it so that way we don't edit it anymore. There are other things that I can apply to the node, like the position, the scale, the rotation, and all of those things help a lot if I want to apply something to all the children. And I'm going to name this one by double clicking. I'm going to name it to be background. If I'm thinking from an engineering point of view, I almost see this as the same way I would see a package folder if I'm in Java. All right, let's make the chef's hat. And as I told you before, I think the chef's hat is a white rectangle or square with some rounded corners. So let's do that. Creation tool, shape, go to rectangle. And now I'm just going to draw my rectangle as to what width I think it is. It doesn't have to be perfect because once we create it, we can manipulate it. I'm going to hit T for translate tool, select the rectangle, and now I'm going to center this shape as well. So I'm going to center the shape. Looks a little tall, so I'm probably going to have to change the height. But if I'm looking at the width is a little wide actually as well. So let's change the height. It's too tall. So I'm going to go down to 200 to start. Already looks better to me. Now, I'm going to start with this. If we look at the width is just a little wide, so I'm going to take this width. I'm going to go down from 189 to 150. Actually, it looks a lot better, maybe 160. If you notice, I don't have a programmatic way to solve this problem. I'm just doing it based on what I see, so I'm using my eye to figure it out. Okay, let's start with this. Now, I'm going to go to the fill, and as you can guess, what color should I make it? If you're at home, you said white. You are totally correct. Love it. Keep up that good work. Then let's get with the stroke. Don't need the stroke because it doesn't have an outline. So I'm going to drop that stroke. Now, here's the really excellent part. Let's look at the corner radius. That's how rounded the corners will be. So these are some pretty nice rounds. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to start at 5. Okay, looks like it's close, but not quite there. I'm going to go from 5 to 8. That looks right to me. Now I'm going to deselect it. Can you see the picture coming in? Now with a few primitive shapes, we haven't done anything fancy yet, but with a few primitive shapes, we've been able to do something pretty incredible. We've been able to make this picture that we've seen and still not have to get into the scary parts of design. And for me, the scary parts of design are when I start working with tools and have to create things. That's a whole different thing we can talk about. If you look at what we've done so far, we've come a really long way with primitive shapes. Let's continue. Now, if we want to do this, the top part of the hat, I see this as two shapes. I'm going to try first, and this is a trial and error thing. I did not create this before during this tutorial. So I'm doing it in real time with you. Okay, so that looks like a rectangle. And remember with the trick we just did with the corner radius? What if we did a very, very intense corner radius? Let's see if we did a 30. Still not round enough on the edges. So that's already letting me know something different is going to happen. But let me try. Okay, wait a minute. I think we got it. So I took the corner radius up, and I think there's a maximum number before it stops making a difference. But let's see. If I did 50, what did I get? Okay, so even at 50, that gives me that shape. But it looks like it's a little too tall, so I can go to the size and change the height. And maybe I'll do a height of 82 instead of 92. That looks so much better. I'm going to select it. I'm going to hit T on the keyboard. Then I'm going to drag it. And we're going to look at the width and make sure the width is correct. So I'm going to center this. So go back to my centering tools. Okay, now that I have it centered, we have it just a little bit too high. When you're in the translate mode, you have these handles that you can use, these arrows. So the vertical arrow, if you click up here, you can go up and down, but you won't go off of the y-axis, so you can't affect the x-axis. Or if you go with the red handle, you can go on the x-axis. So I'm going to take this and bring it down a bit. And then I'm going to want to rotate it. Now, this angle that it's rotated, I should get a protractor because I can't eyeball it and know exactly what it is. But I'm going to just rotate it until it kind of looks like what I want. And if I go this way, I think that's probably good enough for a first pass. Remember, just like with your code, you can touch up your code. You're going to be able to go back and touch up this design. Let's change the colors and change the stroke. Dropping the stroke, my color, I'm going to go to white. Yes, I see that there is a thing at the top here, my edge, but that's okay for now. I'm actually comfortable because we aren't at that point where we can solve that problem yet, but we'll get there. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably feel like, yes, this looks good, but it's not exactly what I want. Well, let's make it to what you want. I'm going to add that shadow because I think the shadow will really give you the separation that will make such a nice effect. So with the rectangle tool selected, I'm going to go right to the edge of my rectangle for my hat. And I'm going to just draw in what I think is the shape that we need. I'm going to remove the stroke. And you can do this shadow a bunch of ways, I'm sure. You can pick a color gray. You can go black and then change the alpha until the alpha looks kind of like the amount of shadow that you want. So let's go that way and see if we can create the same look. So I went black and changed the alpha. Now what I need to do is I'm going to go back to the top of the hat. I'm going to get the rotation negative 17.8. And then I'm going to add that same rotation to the shadow. Okay, so now at least I know my rotation is completely accurate. And I'm just going to move it up. Okay, I think that is correct just to be able to help myself because white on white is a little hard to identify. Here's where adding the stroke back in temporarily could really help me. So I'm going to add a red line just so I can really see where I want this to line up. So there's another trick that we can do here. I'm going to take the width of this. I'm going to make it wider. Okay. And then we're going to do a cool thing called a mask. I want to create a mask. So I'm going to say that the rectangle masks this outer part so the edges don't show. So I select this one. I'm going to add a mask. Then I'm going to select the background. And then there you go. So now I can say that the shadow is masked. So that way I can have that nice look. So if we look at this, everything seems to be working out pretty well. Now, I actually don't like the amount of alpha because this is something I feel like we can control. So I'm going to go back and change the alpha a bit to take it down just so we can look closer to the original. Or we have another option, which is one that I've used more frequently. I will just get the color of the alpha because it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to get the color and I can apply it directly to our shape. So let's take the alpha back up to 100 and then we'll just change the color to the correct color. And the color is E6, E6, E6. There we go. So now we're going to get a more perfect match. And if I take this one and remove that stroke, now it's starting to look even more like the hat that we have. All we're missing for the hat is just that other shape at the top. We're missing this shape at the top. So how can we make this? Well, I have an idea already just from looking at it. To me, that looks like a smaller version of the shape that we have now. So I'm going to take it and duplicate it. So I copied and pasted. And I'm going to drag that up a bit. Now I'm going to put a stroke on this again so that way we can keep it straight just so I can see it. Okay, so then this one is I'm going to call it the top section. Now the reason I want to name it is then when I get to the draw order, I can see where it is. So now I can lower it so that way it turns out to be behind. I have a couple of options. I can manipulate the scale of this or I can manipulate the width. And I don't want to mess with the scale yet because I feel like if I manipulate the width, that should give me the look that I want. So I'm going to take it down, up just a little bit. Now I'm going to move it down a bit. Okay. Oh, I see a problem. We'll fix it in a second, but don't worry about it for now. Just kind of make this work. Okay. Now I have the top of my hat. Let's say I get rid of that stroke. Only thing we're missing right now, looks like the corners are a little too sharp, so maybe we can take down the roundness. We'll take it down to just about right there. Maybe the height is just a little too tall. We can take this down to maybe 70. Okay. Oh, I like that even. Oh, I like that so much better. Now that looks better, but it looks like I'm still too wide. So then I can go to the width, take the width down just a smidge. Okay. That feels good. Maybe I'll adjust it just a little bit. So these are like the tiny adjustments that you'll do. Looks close. Only thing I'm missing now is that the rectangle all the way in the back, you see, it's too tall. So we can do one of two things. We can lower it just a little bit and see if that throws off our design too much. If it does, we can't go with it, but let's just see. I lowered it just a little bit. I feel like it's still too tall. So what we're going to do is take the height here and we're just going to go down because even when we lowered it, it distorted the design too much for what I was comfortable. That looks great to me. Now we have our hat, and this is all primitive shapes, and we haven't even had to touch any of the more complex things. I think that's enough for today. Next thing we'll do, we'll add the crown, and then we'll add the effect of the circle, and we'll do okay, let's stop right here. I think we've created enough for just today. What we'll do is next time we'll add the crown and then the circle, and then once we have all the pieces, we'll add in the animation and make this thing bounce and look really cool. All right, folks, well, I think that's going to wrap up this episode of Getting Started with Rive. I've been your host, Mark Thompson. I'm so grateful that you stuck around to watch this video. Comment down below and let me know what questions you have so I can plan future versions of these talks and these videos, and we can create beautiful things together. I appreciate you. Stay awesome.